Tuolla Lontoossa Jennin mä kohtasin. Halo Vepi, oho. Hän on neidosten joukossa kaunihin. Halo Vepi, oho. Suukon kirsikka silmät niin mustat kuin yö.
Well, welcome to another adventure of the Gloucester Bookies. Today with me, we have a special guest, Emily Games, who's normally behind the camera, but is invited for a special reason that you'll shortly find out about. And Laura Ventimiglia, Susanna Natty, and Wayne Soini. I've got to tell you, the breaking news I bring to you from the television network, which is CBS. I was listening to CBS News a couple nights ago, and they had a news item that students had participated in this scientific evaluation of whether, when you handwrite something, more of your brain is used and alive and active, some electrodes, to do, versus typing like on a computer or a typewriter.
Tell me, I'm all ears. Yeah.
And the answer was, if you're an author who handwrites, you have more of your brain active, alert, and interested than if you are typing.
Love it.
They have a definite thing about that.
Wow.
So my guess is...
This is a problem. My handwriting is very bad. Luckily, I'm not a writer.
Yeah.
I'm a handwriter, and one of my grandsons
How
says...
many people out there are saying they are lucky they're not writers, looking at us on here? But the next thing, and it ties in with Emily's kindness to be present here today with us, is that there's a person I never heard of, but CBS was talking about, called Sarah J. Maas, M-A-A-S. And Sarah J. Maas has recently come out with a book called The House of Sword and Flame.
Flame and Shadow.
The House of Flame and Shadow.
Close enough.
The House of Flame and Shadow.
Yeah.
And it was given in Boston, probably other cities as well, a midnight book launch. In Boston, there was a bookstore where the commentator was standing in front of, and there was a long line, and inside it was one of those bookstores which had tables with coffee and things like that. So it was a full house, and they were waiting for midnight when the magic happens, and they could get a copy of The House of Flame and Shadows from Sarah J. Maas. And the idea, he was pointing out, it was both social event, people had things in common. Basically, Sarah J. Maas was in common with them. And it was a new genre called romantasy. It was romance in a fantasy thing. Sarah J. Maas apparently, not too many years ago, thought up the idea of, what if is she Cinderella with the assassin? Did she do that?
Oh, yeah. So she started her first book. She has 3 different series that she's done. The first one's called Throne of Glass. There's maybe 9 books in that series, so there's a lot of them. I think she said she started writing them when she was 16.
Ooh.
Yes.
So,
yes.
Yeah. So what's interesting though, because I did see that news report where they were talking about her, and another one did an interview with her, and I thought was interesting when you were talking about how authors like writing down as opposed to typing. And I think they asked her if she writes down any of these ideas she has, and she's like, nope, they're all in my head. Wow. So I don't know if...
That's really
that's
third.
That's the third
your
undiscovered
mind is
one.
totally engaged because you're not even writing anything. It's all up there.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, so she has that original series, and I think she did all of them and then decided to start doing a new one, which is the Cinderella-esque one that I think you're talking about, called A Court of Thorn and Roses. I think there's 5 books in that series, but before she finished the 5th one, she started a different one called Crescent City, which is the book that just came out that people were waiting in line for, the third book. And I've read.
Now, this is a person who sells millions.
Yes.
Wow.
Millions of books.
Boy, lots of buzz. Yeah.
So yeah, I first came across this series a few years ago because my younger sisters liked it. And it was before the romantasy genre was a thing. I think Book or Goodreads, I think they actually added it as a separate genre like last year, I noticed. But obviously she's been writing these kind of books for a long time. So they got me into it, and I flew through like 12 of these books so quickly. My roommate was like, what are you doing? I'm like, you got to get into it. And of course, now cut to like 3 years later, now all my roommates are getting into the different series, and I'm just excited because I can finally talk with them about it. But yeah, I mean, it's a lot of it. There's a female, like a strong female character in every series. And there's certain like tropes that she'll use in the books if it's like enemies to romance, but she's really good at world building. I would say. I think that's why it's separated from other books in that genre, because she uses very detailed writing, and it paints such a beautiful picture in your head when you're reading about it. So I think that's sort of what resonated with everybody. Also, just she's written so many of them, so people can really dive into those worlds, but. The really cool thing, and I think why so many people are excited about the book that just came out, is that the older series, the Court of Thorns and Roses, and the new one, Crescent City, are now combined. So I call it the Marvel effect. So they're sort of taking two different storylines and putting them into one. And this is the book that is going into that. The last book, of course, they end on the cliffhanger with like 3 pages left, and of course you're like, okay, now I have to wait a year for this. But I think that's why everybody likes it so much, and so excited for the midnight release.
Well, one other thing before you go, I saw on PBS another surprise to me. The next day was another related story, or to me it was related. Rebecca Yarros, Y-A-R-R-O-S. Rebecca Yarros wrote a new book called Iron Flame.
I did read that.
You
also,
did.
I guess.
I think Ellen needs to be a regular on this.
I think we got to do it. And apparently Flame is big in titles with this genre. And she sold millions of books as well. But the interesting thing, she started a few years ago, and when her agent sold it and it was published, he had no idea that there would be an enormous market for it. He said, and I'll quote from the interview, she was shocked, and she's still shocked at the response. Her idea was, because there's boy meets girl and there's a happy ending that is there, and but it's in another world.
Yeah.
You vouch for that, right?
Yeah, so I read those 2 books too. I
also like them. 2, but there's a third one.
Yeah, so those ones are good as well. It's focused on a world where there's dragon riders, and so a lot of the first book is somebody who's a novice coming in, and you have to go through these trials to become a dragon rider and all that kind of stuff, and it takes off from there, but it's similar to that romantasy where there are those elements. This one a little less romance, I would say, in the first book, and then she tries to like pick it up in the second. Obviously, you can tell when books become successful, they start like tailoring a bit to the audiences in the second book. And they're like, we want this. Okay, I'll give it to you, to sell more usually. But I would recommend that one. That one's also a bestseller right now.
Well, I must tell you. And I thank you for this chance to people. If you only had a better close-up of Emily, her eyes are lighting up with all of this. It's a passionate interest that you have, and these books stoke it every time they come out. Apparently, it's a reliable jolt. Very good. So, okay, thank you for that.
I have one question before she leaves. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but where there's strong female characters in the book, what would you say is a good age for girls to start reading them? Are they too old for young adults? Are they?
I would say, I mean, there's some explicit scenes in them.
Okay.
I think with that, I would say, like high school age, you'd probably be fine.
Yeah.
It's a little more explicit than like Twilight, which I think is like a younger audience.
Oh, got it.
So, I mean, I had friends when I was younger whose mom would like read Twilight because they heard there were like certain scenes and that kind of stuff. So there's definitely more of that. I think that's why it's also, there's this older demographic that's been reading them because they have that. And that's like the romance that it's not the like, oh, like there's a very cutesy romance. It's like, no, it's like we're getting a little more like detailed Game of Thrones stuff. Okay. So there is that. But I would say probably like high school up are the people who are reading it. But definitely like, I would say there's a big demographic of like 20s to like 35.
Wow, nice.
Yeah.
Wow, nice.
How terrific.
Thank you.
Wonderful. I mean, this is a genuine article, real fan.
Yeah.
And you out there who haven't yet explored this as a whole world that awaits you, I'm guessing, just as a guess, that they're available in Sawyer Free Library. And
They might be, you might have to put, they're probably on hold.
oh, yeah, right. Quote available. Because they're really,
Put your name on the wait list and you'll probably get it eventually.
thank you very much.
Of course.
Wow,
Thank you for
thanks,
having me.
Emily.
Great. I'm delighted. And now we shift gears to, who wants to go next?
Susanna.
Susanna wants to
Yeah.
go next.
Oh, I do. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, Susanna.
All right.
We had a general theme. She's going to help us with that one. I asked books that we would either, we do read and reread. It sounds like we have already talked about some. We read and reread, or books that it wouldn't be difficult. You would like to reread it if you had time, even this year. Please.
Great. I'm glad you added that second the qualifier about that I would reread, because I rarely reread. I just want to say it's so interesting what Emily was talking about, because the first time I ever heard about this romantasy was 2 hours ago. This is the new big thing, I guess. Okay. So the whole topic of rereading is so interesting, because I don't want to do a lot of repeats, but then I realized there are some books that I'm not willing to let go of because they meant a lot to me, either because they resonated with me emotionally and they became friends, or because I thought I would need to refer back to them every once in a while. So I brought in 3, and I will start with a children's book because it's just so delicious. It will be very familiar to a lot of people, and that is Matilda by Roald Dahl. This is one that will never leave my shelves, partly because there are young people in my family now, but also because it's just, Roald Dahl is so wonderful and subversive about childhood and standing up for the underdog and making sure that the little and the powerless actually have got a great many resources. And this is certainly the story of Matilda. So Wayne, you like always for people to read a little bit something.
Please
and I thought,
do.
this is so perfect because we're talking about books.
Yeah.
And there's a passage about books in here. So Matilda's parents are just awful. I mean, there's just no way to describe them. They're really just awful people. God. She says one day, "Daddy, do you think you could buy me a book?" "A book?" he said. "What do you want a flaming book for?" "To read, Daddy." "What's wrong with a telly, for heaven's sakes? We've got a lovely telly with a 12-inch screen, and now you come asking for a book. You're getting spoiled, my girl." Nearly every weekday afternoon, Matilda was left alone in the house. Her brother went to school, her father went to work, and her mother went out playing bingo in a town 8 miles away. Mrs. Wormwood was hooked on bingo and played it 5 afternoons a week. On the afternoon of the day when Father had refused to buy her a book, Matilda set out all by herself to walk to the public library in the village. She asked if she might sit a while and read a book. Mrs. Phelps, the librarian, slightly taken aback at the arrival of such a tiny girl, unaccompanied by a parent. Remember, she's 5. Nevertheless, told her she was very welcome. Where are the children's books, please? Matilda asked. They're over there on these lower shelves. Would you like me to help you find a nice one with lots of pictures in it? Oh, no, thank you, Matilda said. I'm sure I can. So then Matilda spends 2 glorious hours reading and comes back and says she needs something new. I'm wondering what to read next. I've finished all the children's books. You mean you've looked at the pictures? Yes, but I've read the books as well. And then she goes on to say that she would like to read The Secret Garden because it's full of mystery. So she lands a big punch, this little girl, already in the first several pages, demonstrating what troglodytes her parents are and how brilliant she is. Stay tuned, if you haven't read it already, for how many ways she finds of upending her parents and the world around her. Fantastic. Okay.
Yeah, nice.
Next, I get into like, if I'm going to return to a book, now I'm getting into the adult area, they tend to be kind of serious, thoughtful books that I almost view them as possible later reference books. And one that came out not too long ago was this wonderful book, which I know a lot of people have been singing the praises of, by Robin Wall Kimmerer, called Braiding Sweetgrass. It is an absolutely beautifully written book about our place in the world and connecting to nature again. She is Native American and comes from that perspective as she brought her love of nature to her study in the sciences and found that there was a big gap in what science was letting her study in how she related to the world. And one thing she does in this book is make a very strong case for embracing a larger picture as you understand more things about nature. And once again, I'll read a passage.
Give us an example.
So she is a professor at a college, and she's taking her students out for a field trip in which they're going to be gathering roots, which is not that easy to do because you, first of all, have to do it respectfully. You have to ask permission of the forest to dive in a few places. And then you have to dig down and find where a root is and then follow it along with your hands and pull it out. So it's a very literally hands-on, hands-in activity. So, and she's got her students out there and she's listening to them. I stay at my patch, working my roots and listening to the chatter slowly subside. I hear an occasional grunt of frustration nearby, a splutter when soil flies up in someone's face. I know what their hands are doing and sense where their minds are as well. Digging spruce takes you someplace else. The map in the ground asks you over and over which route to take, which is the scenic route, which is the dead end. The fine route you'd chosen and so carefully excavated suddenly dives deep under a rock where you can't follow. Do you abandon that path and choose another? The routes may spread out like a map, but a map only helps if you know where you want to go. Some routes branch, some break. I look at the students' faces poised midway between childhood and adulthood. I think the tangle of choices speaks clearly to them. Which route to take? Isn't that always the question? Before long, all the chatter ceases and a mossy hush befalls us. There is just the shh of wind in the spruce and a calling winter wren. Time goes by, way longer than the 50-minute classes they're used to. Still, no one speaks. I'm waiting for it, hoping. There is a certain energy in the air, a hum, and then I hear it. Someone singing, low and contented. I feel the smile spread across my face and breathe a sigh of relief. It happens every time. And that is so beautiful. What she's doing is teaching them that connection. And she's also teaching them teaching us, the reader, that this is a way of life. This is a very philosophical passage about making choices and roots and finding out where you are.
I can see why you would reread that. Or
Yeah.
put it on your shelf to say someday I'll reread it.
Well,
Yes.
I think this is actually one that I will reread because she moves so beautifully and slowly into some of what she's trying to convey. Is that I want to go back to the very first chapters and find out how she got us there, and then go back in and understand some of the wisdom that she imparts about our relationship to nature. I mean, she's a terrific thinker, a terrific feeler. I think really a great voice for how we should live in the world.
Just before you tell the folks who are interested and probably will try to find this book either used or in the library.
I would imagine this would be in the library.
What it is again, the title and the author.
Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. And I'm reading on the back. She's an enrolled member of the Citizen Potawatomi Nation.
Potawatomi.
Potawatomi.
Out in
Okay. Oh, thank you for
Kansas.
that pronunciation correction. That is great.
Okay.
All right.
And then the other.
And the last one I'll just touch on very briefly because it is one I always mean to go back and reread because I found it so fascinating. I found this book. It's called Soul Survivor, S-O-U-L, Soul Survivor by Philip Yancey. And I probably read it first maybe 25 years ago. And it's a great book for people with big questions about philosophy, about religion, about faith. And I'm a very secular person, I will say right at the outset, but I found this man's writing so deep and so interesting about matters of faith that I recommended it to many people at the time. What he's done here is he has taken 13 people that he admires. Some of them are people who are religious. Many of them, the religious ones, are Christian writers. Some of them are not. Here's the list of who he includes. Martin Luther King Jr., G.K. Chesterton, who was a great mind, and I think also he was a religious writer. Dr. Paul Brand, Dr. Robert Coles, who wrote about education, Leo Tolstoy and Fyodor Dostoevsky, Mahatma Gandhi. So he has a wide swath, and he writes essays about each of them and what it was in their writings that spoke to him as a man of faith and sometimes questioning faith. And then at the very end of each chapter, I love this, he will say, for those of you who want to read more about this person, he gives a whole recommendation of other books you could read about the person. I got so much out of this book. And as I was looking through it this morning before I came, I couldn't find any great quotable quote. The essays are just too long, but as I was looking at it, I thought, first on my list to reread, and then I'm going back into Braiding Sweetgrass. You are putting me off from my Christmas stack of books by detouring me, but it's really wonderful.
Yeah, wonderful detour. All right.
Indeedy.
Please.
I did that really fast, so later on we can vamp. But if anybody has any questions, tell me. Otherwise, it's over to someone else.
We'll have more round robin in time. And
So before I start, and I'm going to pass back through the two heavy ones and go back to Matilda.
Oh, good. Yeah.
So you've probably seen or heard of the movie Matilda.
Yes. Yeah.
How similar or different is it to the book? Because the book sounds much more engaging than the movie.
Well, I have heard of the movie. I did not see the movie,
Okay.
so I cannot make a comparison. But this is a great read aloud book.
Yeah.
And it's a great book for an 8-year-old or a 7-year-old or a 9-year-old to curl up with on their own. I think it's a great book for teenagers, too. If you want to figure out how to really get your parents, she's got some great tricks in here. Unfortunately, she has some superpowers, so it may be a little bit difficult.
Yeah.
I mean, I think he's had more than one made into a movie. I think there was James and the Giant Peach, which was also made into a movie.
Yes, yep.
And wasn't he the author of Willy Wonka? Am I having a brain fart here?
you are. You are
No
right.
idea.
Yes.
Oh, is he? He was
Yes.
that. Yeah.
And now
All
there's a
movies-
second Willy Wonka movie out,
yes,
I guess.
there is.
Yes.
All movies my grandchildren love that I sit through 5 minutes here, 10 minutes there, 3 minutes
Yeah.
here. But the book just sounds, like I said, much more engaging.
it is
and
so
a
great.
better conversation piece with grandkids than the movie.
You're just rooting for Matilda.
Yeah.
And you know, for all those disempowered young ones who are fighting back against the real injustices of the world, starting with her troglodyte parents. God.
Yes.
Yeah,
Hey, you have a masterpiece you brought
I
us.
do. So I brought today with me a book called The Last Masterpiece. I'm not sure where to hold this.
That's it.
Okay. So The Last Masterpiece is written by Laura Morelli, who's has a PhD in history, art history, and has taught in the United States, taught in Italy, continues to study and do research. And she writes both fiction and nonfiction. I probably should say what the nonfiction is historical fiction. I mean, the fiction is historical fiction.
Okay.
The nonfiction, I haven't looked at any of her books for nonfiction, but they tend to be about artists and artisans in Italy, where to find, as you travel, some of the hidden treasures that you wouldn't normally see on a tour guide or something like that. But I, like you, Susanna, I keep a lot of my books for reference.
Yeah.
Not necessarily to go back and reread, although I do reread Wuthering Heights every few years.
Yeah.
Really?
I do.
Oh
I
my
do.
God, another one.
And now I'm going to go back this year and read it with a different set of eyes because of some review I just read about it. But the reason I brought this book up, so I have 4 reasons why I brought this book, other than it's one of, in the past year, my favorites. It's about the Monument women during World War II.
Ooh.
Now, the movie, The Monument Men, made us aware of that sort of movement, if you will, and that work of, I think it was the Fifth Army. And there were other countries that did similar work, too. It wasn't just the United States. But when I read this, I thought, well, these are women that were involved, and who ever heard about the role the women played? And so I did a little bit of just Google research, and what I found was that there's actually a foundation called the Monument Men and Women's Foundation. It's a 501(c)(3), exists today, and its purpose is twofold. One is to identify and preserve the people, the men and the women who were involved in that act of preserving, saving, finding, saving, restoring, and preserving artifacts, pieces of art that range from paintings to altars to all kinds of things that I had no idea about till I read the book.
You can go on, but I want you
yes.
to know you're sitting next to somebody related to a monument man.
Is that Walter Kirkland Hancock?
Yes.
Yes. So, well, that's one of the other reasons. I'm going to ask you the relationship in a minute. If I'm going to bring a book, I like to have a connection to
I love
Gloucester.
that. I love
so
that.
I thought this was awesome. And this is actually one of his short bio story from the foundation's website.
Oh, excellent.
So what the foundation does is they're logging history of every single person. I think they identified 348 people from different countries, and they're doing research to write stories about them.
Fantastic.
So that's one of their purposes, is to really preserve the history of the work of the men and the women who did that. Their other purpose is to continue preserving artwork in war-torn countries or just in general that are being restored.
Right.
So it's a interesting. I just came across this the other day when I said so. Yeah, but now tell us, how are you? We'll come back to the women.
All right.
But how are you and to Walker Hancock?
He married one of my brother's sisters, so he was my uncle.
Uncle.
And interesting, the Monuments Foundation, Walker's daughter, my cousin Deanie, for Christmas, she sent me a little pack of playing cards put out by the Monuments Men Foundation, which has got some of the pieces that are still missing that have not been recovered.
Oh, really?
So it's kind of like, everybody, if you're got your playing cards, you happen to look up at the wall and see this one, return it.
Oh,
Okay, you know?
that's amazing.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm making a note of that.
And you mentioned the Gloucester connection. Their houses were near. She was near. Susanna grew up
Right.
near. What was it?
Walker.
Walking distance of Walker.
Oh, walking distance. Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. No, he was a wonderful man, and the story about the Monuments Men is great. But I am really eager to read
hear
this.
more about
wow.
this. So
Yes.
I did check the Sawyer Free Library and the Noble resource before I came in this morning, and it's new. It's just newly published in August of 2023, so it didn't look like it was available yet through Noble, but it is available at the bookstore.
Excellent.
For those of us who like to go back
Yes.
and reference books. But so there's two women, and the way it started out, the book, the format is that it highlights two women. One who was a clerk at Yale University during the beginning of the war, and the other one who was a photographer in Austria. And as a photographer in Austria, she was following in her mother's footsteps, and her mother was a photojournalist. But in Austria, what she was doing was photographing artifacts that her father was in charge of this railroad, not station, but I guess it was like a railroad underground track. And the Germans and the Austrians were using that to store these pieces of artwork under the guise that they were going to preserve them. So she's over in Austria doing this, and her name's Eva. And then Joe is in the United States, at Yale University. Her mother works at Yale cleaning, as a maintenance woman.
Wow.
And, Joe's kind of bored with this and wanting to do something exciting. And one of Joe's outrageous friends convinces her to join the Army WACs. And so off they go to join the Army WACs. And when word got out to her supervisors in the WACs that she worked at Yale, and of course Yale had, was very famous for its artwork and so forth. They never looked at to see what she did there. They just assigned her to this captain who was part of the Monuments Men. So the story is really about two women, and the chapters go back and forth. Sometimes I get a little annoyed with that. It's Eva, it's Joe, it's Eva, it's Joe, and then you've got three in a row of Joe, and I'm like, just tell me the story. But it's written so that it's coinciding in time.
Yeah.
So I found it extremely interesting because, as I said, it brought to light the Monument Women, the work that women did. Well, Eva ends up getting sent to Florence, Italy. Joe ends up getting sent to Florence, Italy. Now, of course, they never meet.
They never meet?
They never meet. Their paths cross. And at this point, they're there for what they both believe is preserving the artwork. But what Eva finds out in the end was not the case. But she doesn't find that out till she's back in Austria. It's really, so enough of the women and the story.
Wow.
And I'm not, but in the end, let me tell you, the two women do the right thing.
Good.
Which was, and it showed a tremendous amount of strength for both of them to stand up for what they believed in, and stand up in a way that wouldn't be typical for women.
Ooh, I can't wait.
So I thought that was great. But here are the other two reasons why I wanted to bring it. And Laura Morelli is a famous author. Now, who knows? There might be people lining up at midnight for some of her books. She's like a USA bestseller. I don't know if she's on the New York bestseller list, but she writes historical novels. She's written this one. She's written one about a gondola maker during the 14th century.
Oh, wow.
That was amazing. She's written a couple of others that happened around during World War II regarding particular pieces of art.
Did she write one about the mafia in Sicily?
No, I don't think so. I don't think. No, she's not.
It's somebody else. Sorry.
I don't want to put her in that category. No, well, we didn't. But what her writing does for me, and I haven't read all of her books, But what her writing does for me is it puts me in the place, in the time. And I'm partial to stories that take place in Italy. I'll just put that out there.
Yeah.
For a long, long time, I read about all different other ethnic groups, and finally when I retired, I said I'm going to start reading about mine. So it puts me in it makes me feel, and a lot of books that take place in Italy, you read it, and it could be taking place in New York City. You know, there isn't that description or that feel of place. So being in Florence during the war, seeing the beauty of it, the destruction of it, going out into the countrysides, you know, out through the region of Tuscany, she just does a really good job of making you feel as though you're there.
Excellent.
And here's the other reason. I hope I can say this without getting teary-eyed. So my mother was an artist, and I never was. I think I probably took an art appreciation course in high school, so I'm sorry for all the natties and the artists in Gloucester. But, you know, I like to go to, first, I'm not a huge museum goer, but when I go to a church in Italy or when I'm in a museum, it's as if I'm looking at a piece and I'm just trying to absorb it. But it's not something that I would necessarily do all the time. So I never truly appreciated my mother's feelings. I mean, I appreciated her work, and she was generous so that we all have pieces of her artwork now that she's gone. But I never understood how she felt about her passion of art. Oh, in fact, you know who she knew? She knew Leonard Krask.
Oh my goodness.
Sculpture.
Man at the wheel.
Yes, his studio was across the street from Vespa George, where she went to art school.
Oh my
and
goodness.
they would be coming to Gloucester for, he went in, of course, and did a lot of art classes for them, and then they would be models for him and so forth. There was this reciprocatory relationship. But every time they were coming to Gloucester on a field trip for you know, the art students, they'd go and knock on his windows. It was like a basement kind of studio with the windows ground level, and they'd say, we're going to Gloucester, and he'd say, say hi to the old man for me. So she knew, this was in the 1943, 44 time. Yeah, but anyway. But what the other thing, so this book did was brought me to a level of appreciation for my mother's sense of art.
That's
and
so great.
Deep commitment and her feelings towards art that I hadn't been able to appreciate before.
Wow.
So that's The Last Masterpiece by Laura Morelli.
Man.
And enjoy it.
I am going to. Art books great.
They are.
Because they can bring you to places that, oh, yeah. I want to write an ode.
Yes.
Oh, there you go. All right, Wayne, what have you got?
Oh, thank you for yours, and I'm going to just. This is Robert B. Parker.
Oh.
Now this is bestseller galore, and a Cambridge, a local guy, Cambridge, Massachusetts guy, and when I looked for a book, probably you both know, mostly he wrote mystery stories. Spencer is one of the characters, which were made into TV series.
Oh yeah.
With Spencer, I think.
Oh, Spencer for Hire.
Spencer for Hire.
Yes.
And the marvelous stories and some others. After I got done reading this book, I wrote him a little fan letter, and he actually wrote back.
What did he say?
Well, nothing. It's so minimal.
Oh boy,
no,
I'm
really.
not even going to quote it.
Wayne amazes me by how he contacts authors, or he does research all over the country for his work.
Well, this is I say he wrote me as 11/7/2001. He wrote me, and this is the letter here from Robert B. Parker, a very short letter, but he signed it, and it's the actual thing. I met a fellow in Cambridge who I don't think he obviously was a near neighbor, but he I don't know that he ever met Robert B. Parker, but he was like Emily for the other. He was a big fan of Robert B. Parker, so much so that he had every book that Robert B. Parker had ever published, every one.
Wow.
And I said, geez, you're the guy.
And how many were there?
I don't know, probably 30 or 40. I don't know if he did more. I said, I've got to give you this letter. And he actually held it and looked at it, and he said, I can't take this. It's too precious. You must keep it.
Oh, wow.
So he never, I tried to give it away. I mean, to the right person. I was like, you deserve it. He didn't take it, but it was the action. And the odd thing, Robert B. Parker, we're writers, died at his, desk.
He died at his typewriter?
At his.
Well, wait a minute. Was he
Wow.
typing or handwriting?
That's a good question.
Okay.
But he was either typing or at a computer, so he was typing. He didn't need his full brain for that stuff. He had so much going for him, but he had a fatal, immediate heart attack instantaneously.
Wow, died in the saddle.
And he
Wow.
never got up from that
Wow.
writing and died. And I'm thinking, well, this letter, he had to typed on the same place, on the same desk, in the same chair.
Wow.
Signed it some years before he passed on.
Got
But it's
momentous
really
aura.
like
Yeah.
somehow merged together with
Wow.
coincidences galore. And I still have it only because this
Well, what
nice
does it
man.
say?
I know, really.
Oh, all right,
And
all
why
right, all
did you write to him?
You can't dangle it in front of us and then not read it.
I read this book, and
Yeah.
I saw, of all the things, see, it's a historical fiction. It's
Okay.
a first-person love story that it's not a mystery like his usual. It's a first-person love story with actually very local connections of the North Shore and Massachusetts.
Wow.
And I found an error, a factual error. So I
You
didn't.
didn't write to tell him how much you loved it.
I wrote all of that, and then I
and then, by
added
the way.
that to show him that I really had closely read this.
Right.
Yeah.
And he all right, I will.
Yes.
He
please.
said, dear Mr. Soini, what? You found a flaw in chapter 14? Thanks for your kind and encouraging letter. Of interest, and then he gives some little trivia about the thing, which has lots of song titles of the 1940s, but no quotes from the music, the actual lyrics. Of interest, perhaps, to someone who reads as closely as you do, the original Love and Glory, which is the name of the book, had interchapter devices called Chronicle, as he originally wrote it, which contained baseball box scores, old ad copy, and captions from Life magazine, and lyrics from popular songs, and news headlines. The permission fees proved too great for either me or the publisher,
Oh, wow.
so we had to scrap them.
Too bad.
It would have made a different book. I don't argue better or worse. And he said,
Oh, my goodness.
so there's a
We
little.
never
Wonderful.
actually addressed, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I didn't
no,
mean to
no,
interrupt.
good.
We never actually addressed whether the error that you found was real or not. How he came to that information.
Right. He didn't. He didn't. He did it very, very correctly.
That was great. Yeah.
Now here's the scoop of my reaction to this, and it reminds me of the passion with which Emily. Here's the book. I got it just like this in paperback.
So this is a straight love story. It's not a mystery. Is
Right.
that what you said? Okay.
Right.
Interesting.
And there's the when I got it home and opened it up and started reading it, this is the first paragraph, which I'm going to read.
Okay.
In memory, it seems someone else, a boy in a Glen plaid suit and a lime green shirt, chewing gum with a cigarette behind his ear, while he danced awkwardly with a girl who made his stomach buzz, and Frankie Lane sang Black Lace on the record player. But it wasn't someone else, it was me, or at least the beginning of me. It was the evening I was born, an embryonic kid with his hair slicked back. I danced for the first time with Jennifer Grayle, and the flowering of my soul was forever wed to a vision of possibility, so gorgeous and unspeakable that even now it seems a trick of time and memory. No child could have felt what I felt, and yet the buzz in my stomach has buzzed for 30 years. It buzzes still, an implacable thrill of passion and purpose that has galvanized me like the touch of God's finger on Adam's inert hand.
Wow.
Wow, that's some prose.
Yeah.
And it skirts so close to being too much, and it doesn't.
I read that
Wow.
paragraph, and I said, I was in awe.
Yeah.
I closed the book, and I put it down, and I said, I'll read it again tomorrow.
That just
That
the paragraph.
Oh, wow.
And I read it again the next day,
Yeah.
and I said, I'm not ready yet to pass on to the next.
Oh,
Wow.
I just put it down. Never had this happen with any other
No.
book.
That is profound.
That was good for 6 weeks.
Just
I
the first
read
paragraph.
that first
Wow.
paragraph over and over
Wow.
for 6 weeks, and before I proceeded to read the rest of the book. Well, I said nothing can top that first paragraph. Even the rest of the book will be good, and it was. But that first paragraph is like amazing. So that's what I did. This book is available in the library and should be obtained by anyone who has an interest in romance, Emily, and it's really a really good love story. And in fact, I'm surprised it hasn't been made into a movie, a la Love Story by Eric Segal, similar to that. It's just one of those classics, again, in the North Shore of Massachusetts, and we would love it. But
wait, does it end in happiness or heartbreak? Oh, no, don't tell me. Don't want to know.
Now look at it. None of these end in unhappiness, right?
Okay.
Although
It wouldn't be a romance.
Wuthering Heights, you mentioned Wuthering Heights.
Well,
I've got a.
Oh, yeah, I wanted to ask about that.
I don't know. For me, I liked the way it ended. I thought it ended in a certain level of happiness.
Yeah. Is this the one with Heathcliff and stuff?
Yes.
Well,
yes.
Here's one for you especially.
Yeah.
Jason Ford. Have you heard of Jason Ford?
No, I don't think so.
Jason Ford, and his last name is unique. F-F-O-R-D.
Oh.
2 F's. F-F-O-R-D. The only one like it. So Jason Ford, and I heard him speak to an audience which filled a movie theater years ago.
Yeah.
He has written a series. I think his character is called Wednesday Next. I think she's a fictional operative for an organization that makes sure that books don't get corroded, corrupted, eroded, or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
Because the tendency and the worry is that sometimes the books, the classics and so on, would mix up and characters would deviate from whatever. And she especially visits the Wuthering Heights book in her automobile. I don't know how she does it, but she comes in there with an automobile. And Heathcliff is sitting around with some others, and he's undergoing psychoanalysis. And the issue is whether or not he's going to change from that. And so far he's been same old Heathcliff, so it's all right. But
wait, what is the name of this? I got to find this one.
I'm sorry to say
the name.
that his name, Jason Ford, is easy. The other things are, I think, start with, if anybody has a computer to look that up, a cell phone, whatever. Wednesday Next, and I think it's that. I think maybe the first one is Wednesday Next.
Oh, that would be the title of the
I think.
Wednesday.
That'll be enough to find it.
Yeah.
Thank you. This sounds like a hoot.
Yeah.
And of course, he had such success with the first one. He's kept on. But
Great.
as typical, authors go to publishers and there's nothing.
Right.
Nobody ever. No. Well, no, because it's so original. Nobody ever thought of it. Nobody would read.
Oh, so he was getting a lot of rejections?
Rejections galore.
Okay.
It's amazing that it was published. Finally, it was published, and it was a bestseller in England. And
Who
then
finally published it? Do you
Don't
remember?
know. Somebody in England.
Someone
some
smart.
publisher.
Yep. It's so hard to know.
And he came over to this country to talk about his books and had an overwhelming favorable response. I just recently encountered him, and I'm expecting the usual reading group of 20 people or something. And they held it in the movie theater, so I already sort of had a clue that he was known, and he had a passionate following. As eccentric and quirky as it sounds, he just has struck a gold mine. Jason Ford. And he's vivid and funny and witty in person as he is in his.
Great.
Here's an example. He told us one of his books, he is a character named Bucket.
Bucket.
And he said he had intentionally called the character Bucket. It goes through, and he said, if you noticed on page 140, took a long time coming, on 140, somebody mentions, don't kick, don't kick Bucket or something. There's a thing in there. He said to get that pun in, which he was gunning for, and he wanted to put it.
140-page setup. I love it.
And he told us this. He was happy to tell us.
Wow.
Anyhow, but Jason Ford, you love it if you love Wuthering Heights, if you love,
Great.
and there's batches of other classic literature that is played with and toyed with in this series.
Wow, sounds like a lot of fun.
And another thing he does is he uses the Crimean War. Even in England, Crimean War is ancient history. What happened? Nothing. But it just came and went, and a few people, too many, died. But then that was it. No, it was a dead-end war. It didn't lead to anything. He has the Korean War because he's anti-war. He has the Korean War go on. The Wednesday Next's brother is in the Korean War, the Crimean War, still fighting 156 years later.
This is very original.
The war that never ended.
Yeah.
And you'd say, well, that kind of makes sense. I mean, World War I never ended because there was World War II was very related to World War I. It's like the whole century was one beginning to end was it never ended. Yeah. But anyway.
Well, I'm going home with a list of books to read.
Yeah.
Well, Jason Ford, just look it up. It's great fun.
It's going to start with Matilda, though.
Oh,
good. Lastly, Walden.
That's a good reference book.
The opposite unsuccess story for an author. Henry Thoreau managed to get a publisher to put Walden out as a book, and they published 1,000 copies. And in those days, the publisher would would print, and then store 1,000 copies, and give them to bookstores as needed, or somebody would come in and purchase it from the publisher. He sold 300 copies of 1,000. And a year went on, and 2 years went on, and the publisher sent him a note that said, we've got 700 copies of your book, Walden, and we don't want them. So we would like to, we're not going to store them anymore. So what do you want to do? So he paid, I think, $20 for the hauling of 700 books from Boston to Concord, where he lived. And then he wrote a funny book, letter to a friend that said, I have a library now of over 800 books, 700 of which I wrote myself. Walden. But then in this century, 20th century until now, it's great. When I spoke at the library, and I did, to the 175th anniversary of Thoreau visiting Gloucester.
Gloucester, yeah.
Thoreau came to Gloucester,
And that was just during this past year, right? That you
Right,
did
during
that?
the-
Yes,
Yes,
during the
Gloucester 400.
Gloucester 400.
Right.
And it was a full house. It was great. Many people are interested in Thoreau, and in Gloucester and the connection. And this book, Walden, before it was published, he worked on it for about 5 or 6 years. He took a little bit out of this first chapter as a lecture. So when he came to Gloucester, he was trying out on an audience what people's responses were
Oh,
to
interesting.
Walden.
Yeah,
So people in Gloucester heard about Walden, some pages that
Yeah.
were before Walden was published. But of course, then it died in the press anyway. But here, Walden, and I'm going to there's a little story worth saying inside here in Walden, in which he wandered around town in Concord, and in one instance he encountered an older farmer and who was ready to stop farming, and you interested in selling your farm and so on. And the guy said, "Sure, you want to buy it?" He said, "Yeah, well, I'd be glad to try my luck with farming." So this is the story. The nearest I came to actual possession was when I bought the old Hollywell place and had begun to sort my seeds and collected materials with which to make a wheelbarrow to carry it in or off with. But before the owner gave me a deed, his wife, every man has such a wife, changed her mind and wished to keep it. And he offered me $10 to release him. Now, to speak the truth, I had but 10 cents in the world. And it surpassed my arithmetic to tell if I was the man who had 10 cents, or who had the farm, or had $10, or all together. However, I let him keep the $10 and the farm too, for I had carried it far enough. And rather to be generous, I sold him the farm for just what I gave for it, which was nothing. For he was not a rich man, and made him a present of $10.
Wow.
And still had my 10 cents and seeds and materials for a wheelbarrow.
Wonderful.
And that's just
Wonderful.
you all know
What a passage.
Walden. You can't beat the guy for what he's doing.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, 1 hour has gone by very quickly in your
Yes.
presence, and I thank you
Zip,
for
zip.
that. And we'll be gathering again together in the future, other programs, but I'd like each of you to conclude with a profound remark.
A profound remark. Reading is great. Do it. Okay.
Oh, can I just say ditto?
Yeah.
You can.
Well, this is a very common phrase that we hear, explanation about reading. It takes you places.
It takes you
It
places.
transports you to someplace else.
Yes.
And I just finished actually writing some notes to my grandchildren. And in one of them I said, I read a lot because it
Yes.
transported me, it took me places.
Thank you, and till next time.
Tuolla Lontoossa Jennin mä kohtasin. Alo Vepi, oho. Hän on neidosten joukossa kaunihin. Alo Vepi, oho. Suukon kirsikka silmät niin mustat kuin